"You are not half the woman your sister is." My mother announced this to an entire dining room of guests at her 35th anniversary dinner. I did not cry. I did not run away. I simply wiped my mouth with my linen napkin, pushed my chair back, and looked her dead in the eye. "Then she can start paying your rent next month," I said calmly. My father dropped his silver fork against his fine china plate. "Rent? What rent? Brad bought this house for us." He had absolutely no idea that I owned the very ground he was standing on. "My name is Nia. I am 32 years old. Before I tell you how I dismantled my toxic family piece by piece, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to relatives who treated you like a scapegoat." Growing up in the affluent suburbs of Atlanta, Georgia meant that maintaining our image was the most important rule in our household. My father, Marcus, was a retired insurance salesman who carried himself like a Fortune 500 executive. My mother, Beatrice, was the head of the event planning committee at the largest church in the city. To the outside world, we were the picture of African American excellence. Inside our walls, the reality was a suffocating hierarchy where love was strictly conditional. I was the eldest daughter, but I was never the favorite. That title belonged exclusively to my younger sister, Chloe. Chloe was the golden child. She was 30 years old, an Instagram lifestyle influencer who portrayed a life of endless luxury. She was married to Brad, a 3-year-old white man who ran a cryptocurrency startup. My parents worshipped Brad. They loved showing off their successful son-in-law to their friends at the country club. I, on the other hand, was the family failure. I was single. I dressed practically, and I worked in real estate. Or, as my mother loved to tell her friends, I managed run-down apartment complexes. I never corrected her. I never told them that I was actually the founder and chief executive officer of Oasis Trust, a massive real estate investment firm. I let them believe I was struggling because keeping the peace was easier than dealing with their jealousy and demands for money. The evening of their 35th wedding anniversary was supposed to be a joyous occasion. I drove my modest sedan up the winding driveway of their massive Buckhead mansion. The house was a sprawling stone estate with perfectly manicured lawns and a grand entryway. It was exactly the kind of property my parents needed to prove their worth to Atlanta high society. I parked between a luxury SUV and a sleek sports car, feeling the familiar knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. I took a deep breath, smoothed the skirt of my simple black tailored dress, and walked up to the heavy oak front doors. The moment I stepped inside, the overwhelming scent of expensive floral arrangements and catered food hit me. The foyer was buzzing with extended family members, church elders, and local socialites. My mother, Beatrice, was holding court near the grand staircase. She wore a sparkling silver gown that probably cost more than some people make in a month. When she spotted me, her bright socialite smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She excused herself from the pastor and marched over to me. "Nia, you finally made it," she said, her eyes raking over my plain black dress with obvious distaste. "I was hoping you would wear something a little more festive tonight. This is a major celebration, not a funeral." I smiled politely, refusing to let her bait me. "Happy anniversary, Mom. You look beautiful." She sighed and adjusted her diamond necklace. "Well, someone has to put in the effort. Go say hello to your father. He is in the living room. Try to mingle and please do not talk about your tenant issues with the church folks. We want to keep the conversation positive tonight." I walked away from her feeling the familiar sting of her rejection. It had been this way my entire life. When I brought home straight grade or report cards, she asked why I was not cheerleading like Chloe. When I paid my own way through college with academic scholarships, she complained that my graduation ceremony conflicted with Chloe's beauty pageant. I navigated through the crowd and found my father, Marcus. I was swirling a glass of bourbon and boasting loudly to a group of men about his golf handicap and his investments. "Dad, happy anniversary," I said, approaching him. He paused his story and gave me a brief one-armed hug. "Nia, good to see you. We were just talking about the stock market. I am sure that goes right over your head, though, dealing with those rental properties of yours." I just smiled and nodded. If only he knew that my firm managed hundreds of commercial properties across the Southeast, but I kept my mouth shut. I grabbed a glass of sparkling water and retreated to a quiet corner to observe. 30 minutes later, the front doors swung open and the real stars of the evening arrived. Chloe and Brad made an entrance that demanded everyone's attention. Chloe wore a designer gown covered in sequins and carried a bag that cost more than a reliable used car. Brad walked in with the arrogant swagger of a man who believed he owned the world. He was loud, overly confident, and immediately began tossing around buzzwords about blockchain and venture capital. My mother practically ran across the foyer to greet them. "Oh, my beautiful girl," Beatrice gushed, pulling Chloe into a dramatic embrace. "And Brad, it is so wonderful to see you." Brad tossed his car keys onto the entry table, making sure the prominent luxury logo was facing upward. "Sorry we are late, Beatrice. I just bought Chloe the brand new Tesla Model X today, and we had to take the scenic route to test out the acceleration." The crowd around them oohed and ached in admiration. My father walked over and slapped Brad on the back, laughing loudly. "Now that is how you treat a woman, Brad. I always knew you were going to be massively successful." I watched this display of materialism from my corner. I knew Brad's crypto company was smoking mirrors. I knew the tech industry inside and out, and his business model was fundamentally flawed. But in my family, the illusion of wealth was far more important than actual stability. They loved Brad because he looked the part and played the game. Eventually, the catering staff announced that dinner was served. We all moved into the massive formal dining room. The table was long enough to seat 20 people covered in white silk tablecloths and set with crystal glassware. The seating arrangement told me everything I needed to know about my place in this family. Chloe and Brad were seated immediately to the right and left of my parents at the head of the table. I was placed at the very far end, wedged between a distant cousin and an elderly aunt who was hard of hearing. The dinner service began, and the room filled with the clinking of silverware and the hum of conversation. I ate my salad quietly, listening to the discussions echoing down the table. Brad dominated the conversation. He talked endlessly about his digital assets, his upcoming meetings with angel investors, and his plans to disrupt the financial sector. Every time he spoke, my parents nodded along as if he were a prophet delivering sacred truths. Marcus raised his glass at one point. "We are just so blessed to have a son-in-law who understands true wealth building." "Brad, you are an inspiration to the younger men in our community." Brad smirked and took a sip of his expensive red wine. "It just takes vision, Marcus. You have to be willing to take huge risks to get massive rewards. Some people are just built for greatness, while others are built to be employees." Hy glanced down the table at me when he said the word employees. Chloe giggled and patted his arm. "Oh, Brad, you know Nia works very hard managing her little buildings. Someone has to do the unglamorous jobs right." The polite laughter that rippled through the guests made my chest tighten. I focused on cutting my steak, breathing deeply to maintain my composure. I had promised myself I would survive this dinner without causing a scene. I had promised myself I would let them have their delusion, but Beatrice was not content to leave it there. As the main course was cleared away, and the catering staff poured champagne for the toasts, my mother stood up. She tapped her spoon against her crystal glass, calling for the room's attention. Silence fell over the long dining table. 35 years, she began, her voice projecting perfectly to the back of the room. "Marcus and I have built a life of abundance, faith, and love. We started with nothing, and through hard work, we created a legacy. We have a beautiful home, wonderful friends, and a position in this community that we hold dear." The guests murmured their agreement. Beatrice smiled warmly at her husband before turning her gaze to Chloe. "But our greatest achievement is our family. Chloe, you have blossomed into an extraordinary woman. You carry yourself with such grace and elegance. You married a brilliant man who provides for you and elevates our family name. Seeing the life you and Brad are building together fills my heart with so much pride. You are the absolute shining star of this family." Chloe beamed, dabbing at dry eyes with her napkin. "Thank you, Mom," she whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. Beatrice then slowly turned her head, and her eyes locked onto me at the far end of the table. The warm maternal smile vanished, completely, replaced by a look of profound disappointment. It was a look I had seen 1,000 times before, but never in front of an audience this large. "And then there is," Nia Beatrice said, her tone dropping, turning cold and sharp. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. I felt the eyes of every single guest shifting toward me. "I have prayed for you, Nia." Beatrice continued, her voice ringing with passive-aggressive pity. "I have prayed that you would find your way. But look at you. You are 32 years old, and you have nothing to show for it. No husband, no children, no ambition. You spend your days collecting rent from poor people in shabby apartments. You show up to a formal anniversary dinner looking like you are going to a funeral. The silence in the room was absolute. Even the breathing of the guests seemed to stop. My uncle shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The pastor looked down at his lap, but no one said a word to stop her. No one ever stopped Beatrice when she was on a rampage. "I want the best for you, Nia," Beatrice said, her voice rising in theatrical volume. "But it breaks my heart to see how far you have fallen behind. Look at your sister. Look at the life she has built. You are not half the woman your sister is." The words struck like a physical blow. "You are not half the woman your sister is." She had finally said it out loud in front of our entire social circle. She had weaponized her anniversary dinner to publicly execute my self-esteem. Chloe looked down, trying to hide a satisfied smirk. Brad took a slow sip of his champagne, looking incredibly amused. My father, Marcus, sat at the head of the table, puffing his chest out, clearly agreeing with every word his wife had just spoken. He looked at me with an expression of pure disdain, expecting me to lower my head. He expected me to cry. He expected me to apologize for being a disappointment. They all expected the scapegoat to absorb the abuse and shrink into the shadows. I took a slow, deep breath. The anger that had been simmering inside me for decades suddenly crystallized into absolute ice-cold clarity. I was completely done protecting these people. I was done hiding my success to spare their fragile egos. I was done allowing them to use me as a foot tool to elevate their golden child. I did not cry. I did not run away. I calmly reached for my linen napkin and wiped my mouth. I placed the napkin neatly beside my plate. Then I stood up. I pushed my heavy wooden dining chair back. The sound of the wood scraping violently against the polished marble floor echoed through the silent dining room like a gunshot. Everyone flinched. I stood tall, my shoulders pulled back, and looked down the long table directly into my mother's eyes. I held her gaze until I saw a flicker of genuine uncertainty cross her face. "If Chloe is so wonderful," I said, my voice perfectly steady, but loud enough to reach every corner of the room, "then she can start paying your rent next month." The confusion on Beatrix's face was immediate. "Rent?" she stammered, breaking her perfect posture. "What are you talking about?" My father Marcus stood up so fast his chair nearly tipped over. He dropped his heavy silver fork, and it clattered loudly against his china plate. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "Rent? What rent?" Marcus boomed, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. "Have you lost your mind, Nia? Brad bought this house for us. This is our home. How dare you speak to your mother that way?" I looked at my father, then at Brad, who had suddenly gone very still. Brad's arrogant smirk had vanished completely. I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a predator that had finally trapped its prey. "Brad did not buy this house, Dad," I said, my voice slicing through the tension. "And you do not own it either. You lost this mansion to the bank 4 years ago when you blew your retirement savings day trading options on margin. You were facing public foreclosure and eviction." Marcus turned a sickly shade of gray. The guests began to murmur in shock. I reached into my simple black dress pocket and pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen a few times and connected to the massive smart television mounted on the dining room wall. The screen flickered to life, displaying a highly detailed legal property deed. "I suggest you read the owner name on that deed." "Dad," I said, pointing to the screen, "because the company that bailed you out, the company that bought this estate in cash to keep you from living on the street, was Oasis Trust. And I am the sole owner and chief executive officer of Oasis Trust. I own the very ground you are standing on. I have let you live here rent-free for 4 years." The silence that followed was deafening. The illusion of their perfect wealthy life had just been shattered into a million pieces. Brad pushed his chair back, his face slick with sudden sweat. He looked around frantically. "I need to use the restroom," he muttered, trying to step away from the table. I turned my gaze to him, locking him in place. "Where are you going, Brad?" I asked, my voice echoing in the massive room. "Do not leave yet. We have not even discussed the $200,000 loan your failing crypto startup currently owes Oasis Trust." I think it is time the family had a real conversation about success. The cool evening air of Buckhead was a stark contrast to the suffocating heat of the dining room I had just left behind. I walked toward my modest sedan, the gravel crunching beneath my sensible heels. I did not run. I did not rush. I moved with the steady, measured pace of a woman who had just executed a flawless demolition of the prison she had been kept in for 32 years. Inside that sprawling stone mansion, total chaos had undoubtedly erupted. I could picture my mother Beatrice collapsing into the arms of the church elders, her silver sequined gown catching the light as she attempted to salvage whatever fragments of her social standing remained. I could see my father Marcus stammering through pathetic excuses, his broad shoulders permanently slumped under the weight of his exposed financial ruin. And I could envision the golden child, Chloe, weeping over a $30,000 diamond tennis bracelet that was about to be repossessed along with her brand new Tesla. But I was no longer responsible for their emotional regulation. I pulled open the door of my car, slid into the driver's seat, and let out a long, slow breath. The silence of the vehicle wrapped around me like a protective blanket. For the first time in my entire life, my chest did not feel tight after a family dinner. I felt dangerously, beautifully free. I started the engine and drove down the winding driveway, leaving the estate that I owned in the rearview mirror. My phone resting in the cup holder immediately began to vibrate. The screen illuminated the dark interior of the car. It was my mother. I watched her name flash across the screen until the call went to voicemail. 10 seconds later, my father called. Then Chloe. The notifications began piling up rapidly, a desperate cascade of incoming text messages and missed calls. I ignored all of them. I merged onto the highway, heading back toward my actual home in the city. The next morning, I woke up in my downtown penthouse. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping view of the Atlanta skyline. I poured myself a cup of black coffee and walked over to the kitchen island where I had left my laptop. I opened my email to find a message from Malik, my lead legal counsel and business partner at Oasis Trust. Malik was a brilliant financial lawyer who had helped me navigate the quiet acquisition of my parents' foreclosed property 4 years ago. He knew the entire history of my family's dysfunction and had been waiting for the day I finally decided to cut the cord. The subject line of his email read, "The Fallout." I clicked it open. Malik had attached a series of frantic voicemails left on the Oasis Trust corporate answering machine overnight. My father had apparently spent the early hours of the morning calling every extension listed on my company directory, desperately trying to reach a human being to beg for an extension on his eviction. I picked up my phone and dialed Malik's private number. He answered on the second ring. "Good morning to the most ruthless chief executive officer in Georgia," Malik said, his voice laced with amusement. I assumed the anniversary dinner was an absolute bloodbath. "It was highly educational," I replied, taking a sip of my coffee. I dropped the property deed on the television screen and served Brad his default notice right on his dinner plate. Malik let out a low whistle. I wish I could have sold tickets to that viewing. How did Beatrice handle the revelation that the daughter she constantly belittles is actually her landlord? She cried, I said plainly. She begged for forgiveness when she realized I had the power to make her homeless. Typical narcissistic pivot, Malik noted. So, what is our next move? Do you want me to formally serve the 30-day eviction notice today? We need to follow the proper county protocols if we are going to forcibly remove them from the premises. Hold off on the formal service for just a moment, I instructed. They are currently panicking, which means they are going to make mistakes. I know my parents, Malik. Instead of apologizing and packing their bags, they are going to try and find a way to trap me. Beatrice is obsessed with her public image. She will not let herself be evicted without trying to spin a narrative that makes me the villain. I want to see what strategy they attempt before we bring the hammer down. You think they will try to fight this legally? Malik asked, sounding skeptical. They have zero ground to stand on, Nia. The foreclosure was completely clean. You bought the property from the bank, not from them. You owe them nothing. I know that I said setting my mug down, but they believe that because I am their daughter, they are entitled to my assets. Keep an eye on any legal filings in Fulton County today. If they are going to strike back, it will be fast and it will be dirty. I ended the call and spent the next few hours managing my legitimate business operations. Oasis Trust was currently closing a massive deal to acquire a portfolio of medical office buildings in the suburbs. I had built my empire through meticulous research and aggressive calculated risk-taking. I thrived in the high-pressure environment of commercial real estate precisely because I had spent my entire childhood learning how to read people's hidden motives. Around 2:00 the afternoon, my phone rang. The caller ID displayed the name of Pastor Jenkins, the head of the megachurch my mother attended. I hesitated for a fraction of a second before answering. "Hello, Pastor," I said, adopting a polite, respectful tone. "Nia, my dear Pastor Jenkins," began his voice heavy with solemn concern. I am calling because your mother is sitting in my office right now. She is in a state of absolute distress. I am sure she is past her. Finding out you are facing eviction tends to be stressful. Nia, listen to me, he said, softening his tone in a way that felt entirely patronizing. Your mother has explained the situation to me. She told me about the misunderstanding with the house and how you have been secretly holding this property over their heads. She is deeply hurt that you would choose to humiliate the family in front of the congregation members last night. We need to resolve this with grace. The church teaches us to honor our mother and father. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair. The manipulation tactic was so predictable it was almost boring. Beatrice had run straight to the church to paint herself as a frail, elderly victim being tormented by a greedy, vindictive daughter. She was using the pastor to guilt-trip me into submission. "Pastor Jenkins," I said, keeping my voice dangerously calm. "Did my mother happen to mention that my father lost that house because he was gambling their life savings on the stock market? Did she mention that I spent my own money to buy it back so they would not be living on the street?" There was a brief pause on the line. "Well, she mentioned there were some financial difficulties." "Yes, but Nia, family helps family. You are a successful woman. Surely you can find it in your heart to transfer the deed back into your parents' names. It is the Christian thing to do. They need stability in their twilight years." I let out a harsh, humorless laugh. "Transfer the deed? Is that what she asked you to demand from me? She is your mother, Nia. She gave you life. She raised you. You owe her respect and care. I owe her nothing." I snapped my patience, finally breaking. I did not ask to be born into a family that treats me like a second-class citizen. I did not ask to be constantly compared to my sister. For 4 years, I provided them with a free luxury home while she mocked my career and called me a failure. I honored my parents by keeping a roof over their heads. They dowered me by biting the hand that fed them. "Nia, anger is a poison," Pastor Jenkins warned. "Do not let your pride destroy your family." "My family was destroyed long before last night, Pastor. And if my mother wants stability, she can go ask Chloe and Brad for it. Tell her my 30-day deadline still stands." I hung up the phone, feeling a surge of adrenaline. Beatrice was mobilizing her troops. She was leveraging her church connections to wage a psychological war against me. It was a classic smear campaign designed to pressure me into giving up my property to save my reputation in the community. 10 minutes later, Malik called me back. His tone was no longer amused. It was strictly professional and urgent. "Nia, you need to get down to the office immediately," Malik said. "I was right to monitor the county filings. Your parents just made their move and it is worse than we thought." "What did they do?" I asked, grabbing my keys and heading toward the elevator. "They just filed a civil lawsuit against you in Fulton County Superior Court." Malik explained, the sound of a keyboard clacking rapidly in the background. "They are suing you for elder financial abuse." I stopped in the middle of the hallway. "Elder abuse? On what grounds?" "According to the filing, they are claiming that 4 years ago, when they were in a vulnerable state of financial distress, you manipulated them into signing away their rights to the property. They are alleging that you promised to hold the house in trust for them until they recovered financially, and that you are now unlawfully trying to evict them to steal their equity. They are asking the court to place an immediate injunction on the property and demanding that the deed be transferred back to them." I felt a cold, furious knot tighten in my chest. They were lying. They were committing perjury to steal a house I bought with my own capital. "Who is representing them?" I asked, stepping into the elevator. "That is the interesting part," Malik said. "They retained a high-powered litigation firm in downtown Atlanta. The retainer alone would cost $50,000. We both know Marcus and Beatrice do not have that kind of liquid cash. They do not." I agreed, watching the floor numbers descend. "But I know who does. Brad. Brad is broke. Nia, you just seized his company assets last night. Brad's crypto company is broke," I corrected. "But Brad has access to other funds. Funds he has absolutely no business touching." I walked out into the parking garage, my mind racing through the financial web I had uncovered during my underwriting investigation of Brad's loan application months ago. When my team had dug into Brad's financials, we found a series of highly suspicious wire transfers coming into his personal accounts. At the time, I had ignored them because they did not directly impact the collateral for his commercial loan. But now, those transfers were the key to dismantling this entire fraudulent lawsuit. I arrived at my corporate office 15 minutes later. Malik was waiting for me in the main conference room. A stack of legal documents spread across the polished mahogany table. He handed me a copy of the lawsuit. It is full of fabricated conversations and emotional pleas, Malik said, pointing to the highlighted sections. They are claiming emotional distress breach of fiduciary duty and fraud. They are trying to paint you as a predatory corporate shark exploiting her elderly parents. Let them paint whatever picture they want, I said, tossing the document onto the table. I need you to pull up the underwriting file for Brad's commercial loan, the original background check we ran on his personal accounts. Malik frowned but opened his laptop. What are you looking for exactly? I am looking for the source of the retainer fee they just paid to that law firm, I explained, walking around to look at his screen. 6 months ago, Brad received a series of massive cash deposits into his personal checking account. The deposits were listed as consulting fees, but the origin account belonged to a nonprofit organization. Malik's fingers flew across the keyboard. He pulled up the archived financial report and scrolled down to the transaction history. He stopped, his eyes widening. Nia, he said softly, the origin account for these wire transfers belongs to the Atlanta Grace Community Church, specifically the Women's Auxiliary Fund. I leaned closer to the screen, tracing the numbers with my finger. Over $150,000 was wired from the church charity fund directly into Brad's personal account over the course of 3 months. And who is the treasurer of the Women's Auxiliary Fund? I asked, already knowing the answer. Malik clicked on a public directory link. Beatrice Anderson, your mother. The silence in the conference room was thick and heavy. The magnitude of the betrayal was staggering. My mother had not just favored the golden child and her white husband, she had actively facilitated a massive financial crime to fund their lifestyle. Beatrice embezzled charity money from her own church, I whispered, staring at the screen. She stole donations meant for battered women and community outreach, and she funneled it to Brad. That is how Brad bought Chloe the designer bags. That is how he afforded the luxury vacations, and that is how they are paying for this high-powered law firm to sue me for a house I rightfully own. Malik looked at me, a sharp predatory grin slowly forming on his face. They just handed us the nuclear option. Nia, if we take these wire transfers to the authorities, Beatrice is looking at federal wire fraud and embezzlement charges. Brad is looking at receiving stolen property and money laundering. They will both go to federal prison. I looked at the lawsuit sitting on the conference table, the document where my parents had sworn under oath that I was a deceitful, abusive daughter. They were willing to destroy my name, my business, and my freedom just to maintain their illusion of wealth and to protect their golden child. We do not go to the authorities yet, I said, pulling my phone from my pocket. If we just hand this over to the police, it gets buried in a quiet plea deal. Beatrice will cry in front of a judge, claim she was confused, and get probation. Brad will hire expensive defense attorneys and drag it out for years. That is not good enough. So what is the play? Malik asked, closing his laptop. They want to play the victims in public, I said, my voice cold and resolute. They want to use the community and the church to shame me into submission. So we are going to let them build their stage. We are going to let them gather their audience, and then we are going to burn the entire theater to the ground. The blood drained completely from Brad's face. He froze slowly, sinking back into his heavy dining chair. His eyes darted nervously toward the large television screen where the legal deed to the Buckhead mansion was still displayed in high definition. He did not say a word. He did not defend himself or deny the $200,000 debt his failing crypto company owed my firm. His silence was the loudest confession in the room. The atmosphere in this dining room was heavy and suffocating. The church elders and extended family members sat perfectly still, their expensive meals forgotten. Then my mother, Beatrice, finally found her voice. She did not express gratitude for the 4 years of free housing I had provided. She did not show an ounce of humility, grace, or remorse. Instead, she slammed both of her manicured hands flat against the silk tablecloth. The crystal wine glasses rattled violently at the impact. "This is a fabricated lie," Beatrice announced. Her voice shook with a terrifying blend of panic and absolute narcissistic rage. She looked frantically around the table at her guests, desperately trying to regain control of her immaculate public image. "Do not look at that screen. My daughter is deeply unwell. She forged these documents because she has spent her entire life burning with jealousy." I remained standing at the far end of the table. I kept my posture relaxed and my expression entirely neutral. "The Fulton County property records are public, Mom," I said smoothly. Anyone at this table can pull out their smartphone right now and verify exactly who owns this estate. Beatrice refused to accept reality. She pointed a shaking finger directly at my face, her silver gown shimmering as she breathed heavily. You have always been a bitter and spiteful child, Nia. You could never stand the fact that your sister was naturally gifted. You are doing this because you are still holding a grudge about your college tuition. She turned to the pastor, performing her role as the long-suffering devoted mother. Pastor Years, she begged us to pay for her university education. She cried and pleaded for our money. We had to tell her no because she simply was not smart enough to succeed. We saved our hard-earned money for Chloe, who actually had potential, and Nia has spent the last 14 years trying to punish us for being honest parents. I let her words hang in the air. The truth was that I had graduated at the top of my class with full academic scholarships, while they spent their money funding Chloe's extravagant lifestyle. But in my mother's mind, my independence and success were just symptoms of my supposed inadequacy. I did not bother correcting her. Her delusion was unraveling in real time, and I wanted everyone to witness exactly who she was. Right on cue, Chloe initiated her performance. The golden child pressed her hands to her face, and the tears began to flow instantly. They were perfect, picturesque tears, designed to elicit maximum sympathy from the audience. She leaned heavily against Brad, clutching his arm as if she were physically wounded by my presence. "Why are you doing this to me?" "Nia," Chloe sobbed. Her voice trembled with practiced vulnerability. She made sure to look around the room to confirm that the guests were watching her weep. "I have only ever loved you. I have only ever wanted you to be happy, but you cannot stand to see me thrive, can you? You are doing this to tear down my marriage." Chloe dabbed her eyes carefully to avoid ruining her expensive makeup. "You are just so bitter because Brad is a successful white man who treats me like a queen. You hate that I have a beautiful interracial marriage and a perfect life while you are miserable and alone. You are trying to destroy my husband's reputation with these ridiculous lies about loans and foreclosures, just because no man will ever look at you the way Brad looks at me." The sheer audacity of her statement was almost impressive. Chloe genuinely believed that my multi-million-dollar real estate acquisition was nothing more than a convoluted scheme born out of romantic jealousy. She was utterly convinced that the universe revolved entirely around her and her fraudulent husband. I looked at Brad. He was currently staring at his half-empty plate, completely unwilling to make eye contact with his weeping wife or with me. He knew the game was over, even if she did not. My father, Marcus, could no longer tolerate the destruction of his patriarchal authority. He pushed himself up from the head of the table. His chest heaved, and the veins in his neck bulged against his stiff dress collar. He completely ignored the reality of the property deed glaring from the television screen. He chose the only defense mechanism he had left to protect his fragile ego: pure, baseless intimidation. "I have heard enough of this nonsense," Marcus barked. He pulled his phone from his suit pocket and held it up like a weapon. "You are not going to come into my home and disrespect my wife and my youngest daughter. I do not care what fake papers you typed up on your computer. I am calling the police right now." "You are going to call the police on your landlord?" I asked quietly, tilting my head. "I am going to have you arrested for forgery and trespassing," Marcus yelled. He marched toward the center of the room, puffing his chest out to assert his dominance in front of the silent guests. "You are a guest in my house, Nia, and you have worn out your welcome. You are an ungrateful, lying disappointment. You are going to leave this property immediately in handcuffs if I have to drag you out the front doors myself. The authorities will lock you away for falsifying real estate documents, and I will personally see to it that you never step foot in Buckhead again." I looked at the three of them, my mother gaslighting the room with ancient history and cruel lies. My sister sobbing about her imaginary perfect marriage while clinging to a man drowning in debt. My father threatening to arrest the legal owner of the house he was currently squatting in. They were so deeply entrenched in their shared delusion that they could not perceive the very real legal trap that had just snapped shut around their ankles. They expected me to back down. They expected the scapegoat to cower under the weight of their collective rage. Instead, I smiled. It was a genuine expression of calm, calculated anticipation. The performance was over, and the real consequences were just about to begin. My father stood at the head of the long dining table with his smartphone raised in the air like a weapon, his chest puffed out in a desperate, pathetic display of patriarchal authority that no longer existed in reality. He was waiting for me to break. He was waiting for the obedient, discarded scapegoat of the family to burst into tears, apologize for ruining the anniversary dinner, and retreat back into the comfortable shadows where I belonged. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact. I did not let a single ounce of fear show on my face because there was absolutely no fear left inside of me. "Call them, Dad," I said, my voice cutting through the heavy, suffocating silence of the formal dining room. "Please dial the number right now. I would absolutely love to stand here and explain to the Atlanta Police Department why a retired broke insurance salesman is attempting to have his landlord arrested for trespassing at a dinner party hosted on her own legal property. While we wait for the squad cars to arrive with their sirens blaring, we can review the public property deed together with the responding officers." Marcus hesitated. His thumb hovered over the glowing screen of his phone, but he did not press the buttons. The sheer unbothered confidence in my posture completely paralyzed him. The wealthy guests sitting around the table shifted uncomfortably in their silk-covered chairs. The pastor cleared his throat, looking down at his untouched slice of cake. The grand illusion of my father's absolute power and wealth was dissolving right in front of his prestigious social circle, and he was powerless to stop it. When it became abundantly clear that Marcus was not going to make the call to the police, I turned my attention away from him. He was no longer the primary threat in the room. The real parasite was sitting at the right hand of my mother, sweating through his expensive tailored suit. I reached into the thick leather briefcase I had left resting against the wall near my chair. I unclasped the heavy brass locks and pulled out a second, much thicker manila folder. The crisp sound of the heavy paper sliding onto the dining table made Brad physically flinch. "Since we are having a public family meeting about finances and success," I announced, letting my gaze sweep across the terrified faces of my parents and my golden child sister, "I think it is only fair that we discuss the massive glittering elephant sitting in the middle of the room." I opened the folder. It was filled to the brim with highlighted bank statements, corporate tax filings, and internal auditing reports generated by my firm's legal team. Chloe clutched Brad's arm even tighter. Her fake theatrical tears had stopped entirely, replaced by a very real, very raw expression of panic. She did not know what was inside the folder, but she knew her husband was absolutely terrified of it. His breathing had become shallow and rapid. "Brad," I said pleasantly, leaning forward and resting my hands on the edge of the table, "let us talk about your revolutionary cryptocurrency startup. The one you have been bragging about loudly all evening. The one that supposedly funded that brand new luxury Tesla currently sitting in my driveway." Brad swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed nervously against his tight collar. "Nia, this is family business," he stammered, his voice dropping an octave as he tried to maintain his tech bro facade. "Whatever emotional issues you have with your parents tonight, leave me and my wife out of it. We have absolutely nothing to do with your real estate investments or this house." "You have everything to do with my investments," I corrected him smoothly, "because when you applied for a massive commercial expansion loan from Oasis Trust exactly 6 months ago, you legally authorized my underwriting team to conduct a comprehensive, invasive audit of your personal and corporate financials. You assumed my firm was just some faceless corporate lending entity in downtown Atlanta. You were so arrogant that you never even bothered to check who the chief executive officer was." I pulled a printed spreadsheet from the stack and slid it down the polished table. It glided across the silk tablecloth and stopped right in front of the pastor. "My underwriting team is incredibly thorough." I continued raising my voice so the entire room could hear every single syllable of his destruction. "We looked deeply into your blockchain algorithms, your daily user acquisition metrics, and your monthly cash flow statements. And do you know what we found, Brad? We found absolutely nothing. No proprietary technology, no legitimate user base, no actual revenue streams whatsoever." Chloe gasped loudly, her hand flying to cover her mouth. "That is a lie," she shrieked, looking at her husband for validation. "Brad is a tech visionary. He has elite angel investors lined up around the block in Silicon Valley. You are just making this up to ruin my marriage. He has victims lined up around the block." I corrected her coldly, not breaking eye contact with Brad. "Your husband is not a tech visionary. Chloe, he is a con artist. His entire company is nothing but a classic textbook Ponzi scheme. He has been taking money from new investors and using it to pay off the initial investors, secretly skimming a massive percentage of cash off the top to fund your designer wardrobe, your expensive vacations, and your luxury car leases. The company is completely insolvent and drowning in debt." The church elders at the table began to murmur in shock. The phrase Ponzi scheme hung in the air, thick and toxic. Brad opened his mouth to defend himself, to spin another lie, but no words came out. He just stared at the open folder in my hands as if it were a loaded weapon pointed directly at his chest. But a Ponzi scheme requires initial seed money to get off the ground, I explained, walking slowly around the edge of the dining table, the click of my heels echoing in the silent room. It requires a massive injection of capital to create the illusion of early success and lure in the first round of victims. And Brad, with his long documented history of failed business ventures and maxed-out personal credit cards, did not have that kind of capital lying around. No legitimate bank would lend to him. No venture capitalist would touch his garbage business model with a 10-ft pole. I stopped walking when I reached the back of my mother's chair. Beatrice was sitting perfectly still. Her posture was rigid, her breathing shallow and rapid. She was staring straight ahead, refusing to look at me, refusing to look at the pastor, and refusing to look at her precious golden child. "So, where did the seed money come from?" I asked the silent room, letting the tension build until it was almost unbearable. How did a broke, unemployed man suddenly secure hundreds of thousands of dollars in liquid cash to launch a fraudulent crypto exchange? I reached into the folder and pulled out another document. This one featured a highly recognizable ornate logo printed at the top of the page. It was the official letterhead of the Atlanta Grace Community Church. The very church my mother had devoted her entire adult life to. The very church whose leadership was currently sitting at this dining table eating the expensive catered steak my mother had paid for to show off her wealth. I placed the document gently on the table right next to my mother's half-empty crystal wine glass. "Pastor Jenkins," I said respectfully, addressing the older man directly, "my mother has served as the head treasurer for your Women's Auxiliary Fund for the past 7 years. Has she not?" The pastor looked incredibly confused, his brow furrowed in deep pastoral concern. "Yes, Nia," he answered slowly, his eyes darting between me and Beatrix's frozen profile. "Your mother has been a faithful, trusted steward of the church's charitable donations. Those funds are strictly designated for our domestic violence shelters and our community food banks for the less fortunate." I nodded slowly, letting the tragic reality of his words sink into the minds of every guest present. "They were designated for charity," I corrected him gently, "but that is not where they actually went." Beatrice let out a strangled, breathless sound. She grabbed the edge of the thick wooden table, her knuckles turning completely white from the strain. Her carefully applied expensive makeup could not hide the sickly ashen gray color that was rapidly draining the life from her face. 6 months ago, I announced, my voice echoing off the high ceilings of the dining room with absolute authority. A series of massive unauthorized wire transfers were initiated from the Women's Auxiliary Fund. The money was quietly transferred out of the church's primary holding accounts and routed through a dummy shell corporation. From there, it was deposited directly into the personal checking account of Bradley Hayes. Chloe dropped her silver fork. It hit her china plate with a sharp, loud clatter. She turned her head slowly, looking at her husband with wide, terrified eyes. "Brad," she whispered, her voice trembling with the realization that her perfect life was collapsing. "What is she talking about? What did you do?" "He did not do it alone, Chloe," I said sharply, ensuring she heard the devastating truth about her own mother. Brad did not have access to the church's banking routing numbers. He did not have the security authorization passwords required to bypass the dual authentication protocols on those charitable accounts. I placed my hands on the back of my mother's chair and leaned forward slightly, bringing my face close to hers. Only one person sitting at this table had the authority to initiate those wire transfers, I said softly, looking down at the top of my mother's perfectly styled hair. Only one person had the power to embezzle hundreds of thousands of dollars from the most vulnerable people in this city just to fund a fake tech startup for her favorite son-in-law. Beatrix's entire body began to shake uncontrollably. She closed her eyes tightly, thick tears leaking from the corners and ruining her expensive mascara. She shook her head back and forth, a pathetic, silent denial of the undeniable financial facts sitting right in front of her. "You stole it," I stated, stripping away the final layer of her pristine public image. "You stole the charity money to protect the family's image. You could not bear the thought of your precious, wealthy country club friends finding out that your perfect daughter married a broke fraud. You could not stand the idea of your golden child struggling financially while your scapegoat daughter built a real estate empire. So you secretly co-signed the fraudulent loan documents. You authorized the illegal wire transfers to his accounts. You literally took food out of the mouths of hungry families so your daughter could carry a Chanel bag and drive a brand new Tesla. The dining room erupted into absolute chaos. Pastor Jenkins stood up abruptly, his heavy chair scraping loudly against the marble floor. His face was a mask of absolute horror and righteous religious betrayal. "Beatrice," he demanded, his voice booming with deep pastoral authority. "Tell me this is a lie. Tell me you did not steal from the house of the Lord." Beatrice could not speak. Her chest heaved violently as she gasped for air. Her hands released their tight grip on the edge of the table, and she collapsed backward into her chair, losing all of her strength. She looked incredibly small, ancient, and entirely broken. All the haughty arrogance, all the cruel superiority she had wielded against me for 3 decades evaporated into thin air. She was no longer the respected matriarch of Atlanta society. She was an exposed, cornered criminal. Marcus rushed to his wife's side, his face pale with confusion and mounting terror. "Beatrice," he pleaded, grabbing her shaking shoulder. "What is she talking about? Tell the pastor she is lying right now. Tell him you did not touch that charity money. She cannot tell him that." "Dad," I replied coldly, gathering my documents and placing them neatly back into my leather briefcase, because the banking trails are absolute. The digital footprints are permanent and trace directly back to her secure login credentials. And the most devastating part of this entire situation is that the Internal Revenue Service and the Federal Bureau of Investigation do not care about protecting your family image. Chloe was sobbing uncontrollably now, her loud cries filling the room. She pushed her chair back and scrambled away from Brad as if he were carrying a contagious disease. She looked at our mother, then at her husband, finally realizing that her entire perfect, curated life was a fragile house of cards, built entirely on stolen money and desperate lies. If the church decides to audit those accounts tomorrow morning, I continued looking directly at this pastor who was staring at my mother with undisguised disgust, and they discover the missing capital, they are legally obligated to report it to the authorities. And when they do, my mother will not be facing a simple civil lawsuit. Embezzling from a registered nonprofit organization across state banking lines is federal wire fraud. I snapped the brass locks of my briefcase shut. The sharp metallic clicks sounded exactly like jail cell doors closing for good. Beatrice let out a loud, agonizing wail. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently as the cold reality of her impending federal prison sentence crashed down upon her. Her precious reputation was dead. Her golden child's marriage was destroyed. Her husband's patriarchal illusion was shattered into dust, and she had done it all to herself just to keep up appearances. I picked up my briefcase and turned to walk away from the total carnage I had just unleashed. I had not raised my voice once during the entire confrontation. I had not shed a single tear of weakness. I had simply held up a mirror to their profound toxicity and let the reflection destroy them. Marcus watched me walk toward the grand foyer, his eyes wide with a mixture of raw terror and sudden pathetic respect. He finally understood exactly what kind of woman his eldest daughter had become. While he was busy ignoring her, I stopped at the wide archway leading out of the dining room and looked back at the ruined anniversary party. My mother was sobbing hysterically into her napkin. Brad was staring blankly at the wall, mentally calculating his inevitable prison time. Chloe was weeping into her hands, completely stripped of all her arrogance and unearned pride. "You were right about one thing, Mom," I said quietly, knowing my voice would carry across the silent, devastated room. "I am not half the woman my sister is. I am the woman who owns the roof over her head, and I am the woman who holds the evidence of your federal crimes in her briefcase." I turned my back on the dining room and walked into the grand foyer. The marble floor felt cool beneath my heels. I reached for the heavy brass handle of the front door, ready to leave the suffocating mansion behind me. But before I could turn the knob, heavy footsteps pounded against the floorboards. "Neo, await," Marcus demanded, his voice echoing in the cavernous entryway. "Do not walk out that door." Beatrice was right on his heels. She had abandoned the pastor and the crying golden child in the dining room. Her silver gown rustled loudly as she stepped in front of the door, physically blocking my exit. She was breathing heavily, her mascara completely ruined, but the desperate, calculating look in her eyes had already returned. "You cannot just drop a bomb like that and walk away," Beatrice hissed. "You are going to fix this, Nia. You are going to fix this right now before Pastor Jenkins calls the police on me." I looked at the woman who had spent 32 years tearing down my self-esteem. "Fix it?" I asked calmly. You committed federal wire fraud, Mom. You embezzled charity funds. How exactly am I supposed to fix your felony? Marcus stepped closer, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me the way he always had when I was a child. You are going to transfer the deed to this house back into our names by tomorrow morning. He ordered, his voice low and threatening. And you are going to draft a legal document completely forgiving that $200,000 loan your company gave to Brad. If you clear Brad's debt, he can use whatever funds he has left to quietly repay the church auxiliary account before they do a formal audit. We can sweep this entire mess under the rug and protect the family name. Beatrice reached out and tried to grab my hands. Her grip was clammy and desperate. Please, Nia, she begged, shifting instantly from demanding to playing the victim. I am your mother. If this gets out, I will go to prison. They will lock me away. The church will excommunicate us. We will lose everything we have built in Atlanta. You have so much money now. You own a whole real estate firm. You do not need this house, and you do not need Brad's money. Be the bigger person and save your family. I slowly pulled my hands out of her grasp. The sheer entitlement of their demand was breathtaking. You want me to subsidize your fraud? I stated, looking back and forth between them. You want me to give you a multi-million-dollar estate for free and absorb a massive financial loss from a crypto scam just so you do not have to face the consequences of stealing from battered women and food banks? Marcus slammed his hand against the wall. We are your parents, he shouted. We gave you life. We put clothes on your back. You owe us. I looked at my father with absolute disgust. I paid you back for every piece of clothing and every plate of food. When I saved you from living in your car 4 years ago, I replied coldly. I gave you a free ride while you treated me like garbage. I sat at that dining table tonight and listened to you praise a white con artist while my mother publicly humiliated me. And now when the police are at your doorstep, suddenly I am family again. Suddenly I am the one who needs to empty my bank accounts to save you. The answer is no. Marcus' face twisted into an ugly mask of pure rage. He pointed a thick finger just inches from my face. You listen to me, you arrogant little brat, he snarled. If you do not sign that deed over to us, I will make sure you lose every single thing you have built. I know people in this city. I know developers. I know city council members. I know the investors at the country club. I will go to every single one of them and tell them you are a ruthless, predatory slumlord. I will tell them you stole your own parents' home out from under them. I will drag the name of Oasis Trust through the mud until your clients drop you and your firm goes bankrupt. You think you are untouchable because you have some money now. I will destroy your business, Nia. I will destroy your life. I did not flinch at his threats. I just looked at him with profound pity. You do not have any con. Dad, I said softly, you are a broke, retired insurance salesman who gambled away his retirement. Your country club friends only tolerate you because they think you still have money. Once the church scandal breaks, they will not even let you park cars in their lot. I reached past. My mother grabbed the brass handle and pulled the heavy oak door open. The cool night air rushed into the stifling foyer. I will expect you to vacate the premises within 30 days, I said without looking back. If you damage the property on your way out, my lawyers will seize your pensions. I walked down the stone steps and got into my sedan. As I drove away, I could see my father standing in the doorway, his face purple with rage, shouting into the night. The next morning, the Atlanta sun was pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my downtown corporate office. The events of the anniversary dinner felt like a surreal movie, but the peace in my chest was very real. I was sitting at my glass desk reviewing an acquisition contract when my business partner Malik walked into my office. His usual relaxed demeanor was completely gone. He looked incredibly tense. Nia, we have a situation, Malik said, closing my office door behind him. Before I could ask him what was wrong, the receptionist buzzed my phone to tell me someone was demanding to see me in the lobby. I walked out of my office to find a man in a cheap suit standing by the reception desk. Are you Nia Anderson? Anderson, he asked. Yes, I replied. He shoved a thick stack of legal documents into my hands. You have been served, he said flatly before turning around and walking out the glass doors. I looked down at the heavy stack of papers. The cover page bore the seal of the Fulton County Superior Court. Malik stepped up beside me, his jaw clenched tight. I already checked the digital county docket this morning, Malik said quietly. Your parents did not wait. They hired the most aggressive, unethical civil litigation firm in the city. I opened the folder and read the bold black text at the top of the complaint. Plaintiffs Marcus and Beatrice Anderson versus defendant Nia Anderson. I flipped to the summary of charges. My blood ran cold as I read the vicious fabricated lies they had sworn to under penalty of perjury. They were officially suing me for elder financial abuse. According to the lawsuit, my parents claimed that 4 years ago they were suffering from severe cognitive decline and extreme emotional distress. They alleged that I had used my background in real estate to trick them into signing over the deed to the Buckhead mansion. The document stated that I had promised to hold the house in a protective trust for them, but instead I had maliciously transferred the title to my own corporate entity to steal their generational wealth. They were claiming millions of dollars in emotional damages, demanding the immediate return of the property, and asking the judge to freeze all of the operating accounts for Oasis Trust, pending a full financial investigation. They were trying to choke my company to death. They filed an emergency injunction, Malik explained, pointing to a specific clause on the second page. Their lawyers are arguing that you are a flight risk who preys on elderly family members. They want the court to lock down your assets, so you cannot retaliate against them for exposing you. I stared at the lawsuit, feeling a dark, dangerous energy settling over me. My father had actually followed through on his threat to destroy my business. Rather than facing their own crimes, rather than turning themselves in for stealing from the church and running a Ponzi scheme, they had decided to go on the offensive. They had decided to publicly brand me as a predator to hide their own sins. They really think they can outsmart me, I whispered, gripping the legal document so tightly my knuckles turned white. They really think they can drag me into a courtroom and win. Malik looked at me, a serious expression on his handsome face. What is our move, Nia? Do we file an immediate motion to dismiss? We have the original purchase agreements. We can prove it was a clean bank sale. I shook my head slowly. No, I said, a cold smile, touching my lips. If we dismiss it quietly, they just keep playing the victims in private. They want a public war, Malik. They want to use the legal system to ruin my reputation in Atlanta. So, we are going to let them step right into the arena. The very next morning, the assault began exactly as I had predicted. My sister Chloe had always been a master of digital manipulation, and she wasted no time weaponizing her online platform against me. I was sitting in my office when Malik walked into the room holding his tablet. His face was grim as he placed the device on my glass desk. "You need to see this," he said quietly. I pressed play on the video. Chloe was sitting on the floor of her perfectly decorated living room wearing an oversized sweater and absolutely no makeup. She had meticulously crafted the image of a broken, traumatized victim. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she looked directly into the camera lens. "My heart is completely shattered," she sobbed, wiping her eyes with a trembling hand. "I never thought I would have to make a video like this, but my family is under attack by someone we trusted." Chloe went on to weave a horrific fictional tale. She told her millions of followers that her abusive, greedy older sister was trying to illegally seize their childhood home and render our elderly parents homeless. She claimed that I was a ruthless corporate landlord who preyed on vulnerable seniors. She begged her followers for prayers and support, saying that her family was terrified of what I might do next. She did not mention the embezzlement. She did not mention Brad's Ponzi scheme. She only painted herself and our parents as innocent martyrs fighting against a corporate monster. The video went viral within hours. The comment section was a toxic wasteland of outrage directed entirely at me. People who had never met me were calling for my business to be boycotted. Local Atlanta socialites whom my mother had undoubtedly called began sharing the video on their own pages. The smear campaign was meticulously coordinated and incredibly effective. Members of the Atlanta Grace Community Church began flooding our corporate phone lines with hateful messages. Pastor Jenkins even posted a thinly veiled sermon on his social media account about the sin of corporate greed destroying families. The public backlash did not just stay on the internet. It began to bleed into the real world. By noon, Noises Trust began losing wary clients. 2 major commercial tenants called to say they were reconsidering their lease renewals because they did not want to be associated with a firm under investigation for elder abuse. The receptionist was fielding calls from local news outlets wanting a statement. The pristine reputation I had spent years building was being dragged through the mud by my own sister for the sake of Instagram likes and a desperate attempt to hide her husband's fraud. Malik was pacing back and forth off my office carpet. His legal mind was moving a mile a minute. "We cannot let this stand, Nia," he said, stopping to look at me. "This is textbook defamation. She is causing tangible financial harm to this company with these fabricated claims. I want to draft a cease and desist order immediately. I want to file a massive defamation lawsuit against Chloe and drag her into civil court. We have the underwriting files to prove she is lying. We can shut this down by the end of the business day. I watched the video loop on the tablet screen. I watched Chloe cry her fake tears and ask for sympathy. I reached out and turned the screen off. No, I said simply. We are not going to sue her for defamation. We are not going to send a cease and desist order. We are not going to respond to the media or issue a public statement defending ourselves. Malik looked at me as if I had lost my mind. Nia, they are destroying your brand, he argued. They are interfering with our business operations. You cannot just sit back and let them control the narrative. If we do not fight back, people will assume her lies are true. I stood up from my desk and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the busy Atlanta streets below. Let them climb as high as they want. Malik, I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of panic. The higher they climb, the harder they are going to fall. If we sue them now, they will just play the victim card even harder. They will tell the world that the big evil corporation is trying to silence them with expensive lawyers. It will only feed their narrative and give them more attention. I turned back to face him. You have to understand how my family operates, I explained. They survive on attention and validation. Right now, Chloe feels invincible because she has the sympathy of the internet. My parents feel powerful because they think they have backed me into a corner. They think they are winning this war. I want them to feel that victory deep in their bones. I want them to become so arrogant and so overconfident that they stop paying attention to the real danger looming right over their heads. Malik let out a frustrated sigh, but he stopped pacing. So, what is the actual plan then? He asked, crossing his arms. How do we stop them without stopping them? I walked back to my desk and pulled up our internal banking portal. They filed an emergency injunction to freeze my assets, I said, pointing to the computer screen. Their high-priced lawyers are going to serve a subpoena to our banking partners by the end of the day. They want to lock down the operating accounts for Oasis Trust, so I cannot move any capital. They want to choke me out financially. I clicked on a specific routing number and highlighted it on the screen. You are going to let them do it, I instructed Malik. When their legal team contacts our bank, you are going to offer absolutely no resistance. You are going to hand over the routing numbers for this specific account. Malik leaned over the desk and looked at the account I had highlighted. A slow understanding began to dawn on his face. Nia, this is the secondary holding account, he said softly. There is barely $50,000 in here. It is just a decoy account we use for minor vendor transactions. All of our massive commercial capital is secured in offshore trusts and completely separate holding entities that their lawyers do not even know exist. Exactly, I said. But their lawyers do not know that. Brad is a terrible businessman and his legal team is moving too fast on emotion instead of proper corporate discovery. When they freeze this account, they are going to think they just froze my entire real estate empire. They are going to think they just cut off my oxygen supply and won the lawsuit before it even begins. Malik finally smiled, that sharp, predatory smile I appreciated so much. It is a brilliant trap, he admitted. We give them a meaningless victory to keep them distracted while we prepare the real execution. I will contact their legal team and play dumb. I will make it look like we are scrambling to protect this decoy account so they think they hit the jackpot. The rest of the week played out exactly according to my design. We operated in absolute silence. The news articles continued to circulate. The church community held prayer circles for my parents. I ignored every single hateful email and voicemail that came through our corporate system. I instructed my staff to politely decline all media requests. We became a fortress of silence while my family danced in the spotlight they had created for themselves. On Thursday afternoon, the legal freeze went into effect. Malik walked into my office and confirmed that the decoy account had been completely locked down by a court order. Brad's high-priced lawyers had successfully paralyzed a meaningless fraction of my wealth, and they were incredibly proud of themselves for doing it. Less than an hour later, my sister could not contain her excitement. Chloe went live on her social media platforms to celebrate her perceived victory. I sat at my glass desk with Malik, and we watched the broadcast together in complete silence. Chloe was no longer wearing her oversized sad sweater. She was dressed in a stunning designer outfit, sitting on the patio of a high-end Buckhead restaurant. Brad was sitting right beside her, holding a glass of expensive champagne. Their faces were glowing with arrogant triumph. The lighting was perfect and their smiles were wide. "We did it, guys," Chloe announced to her thousands of live viewers, her voice bubbling with excitement. "The justice system works. The courts just stepped in and froze my sister's illegal corporate accounts. She can no longer use her dirty money to hurt our family or try to steal our parents' home. The truth always wins in the end." Brad leaned into the camera frame, his white teeth flashing in a smug, confident smile. "It just goes to show that you cannot bully good people," he added, taking a sip of his champagne. "We fought back against corporate greed and we shut it down completely. Thank you to everyone who supported us and prayed for us during this incredibly dark time. We are finally safe from her abuse." Chloe raised her glass to the camera, toasting to her adoring fans. "We are going to use this momentum to help other victims of financial abuse," she declared. "We are not stopping here. We are going to make sure she pays for everything she has done to our family." Malik shook his head as the live stream ended. "They really think they have you beat," he said quietly. "They are throwing a massive party on the deck of a sinking ship." I looked out the window at the Atlanta skyline, my expression completely cold. "Let them drink their champagne," I said. "They are going to need the liquid courage for what comes next." 2 weeks passed since the freezing of the decoy account. 2 weeks of my family basking in the glow of their fabricated triumph. They were not content with simply winning a quiet legal battle in their minds. My family operated on a currency of public validation, and they needed to milk this imaginary victory for every possible drop of social capital. That is when the invitations went out across the city. Chloe and Brad announced that they were hosting a massive, highly publicized charity gala at the Four Seasons Hotel in downtown Atlanta. The sheer audacity of the event was breathtaking. The stated goal, printed on heavy gold-embossed cardstock, was to raise legal funds and awareness for victims of family financial abuse. It was a direct public attack aimed squarely at my reputation. They were throwing a lavish party to celebrate themselves as brave survivors fighting against a greedy corporate monster. The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. Brad was using the social momentum of a frozen bank account to launder his own image in the community. My mother Beatrice had somehow convinced the leadership of the Atlanta Grace Community Church to co-sponsor the event. Pastor Jenkins had even sent out an email blast to the entire congregation, encouraging them to purchase 1,000 tickets to support this noble cause. They were collecting donations from the exact same church community they had already embezzled from. It was a level of sociopathic greed that went far beyond mere vanity. They were draining the well twice and smiling while they did it. I sat in my penthouse office late on a Friday afternoon, watching the entire circus unfold on my computer screen. Chloe was posting constant updates on her social media platforms. She filmed herself walking through the grand ballroom of the Four Seasons, pointing out the massive floral arrangements and the crystal chandeliers. She cried on camera again, talking about how much it meant to her parents to see the community rally around them during such a dark time. She thanked her amazing husband, Brad, for working tirelessly to organize the gala despite the stress of his own startup company. Malik sat across from my desk, sipping a glass of water. He was watching the same live stream on his own tablet. The audio of Chloe's high-pitched artificial voice filled my office. "She spent at least $50,000 on those white orchids alone," Malik said quietly, shaking his head. "The catering package at that hotel for 300 guests is easily another 100,000. They are throwing a party that costs more than most people make in a decade, and they are doing it to beg for donation money. They are desperate," I explained, leaning back in my leather chair. "Brad knows his crypto company is dead in the water. The initial seed money they stole from the church auxiliary fund is almost completely gone. They need a massive influx of cash right now just to maintain their lifestyle and pay the retainer for their aggressive lawyers. This gala is not a charity event, Malik. It is a cash grab disguised as a crusade. They are trying to crowdsource their legal defense fund because they are secretly broke." I watched the screen as the live stream transitioned to the red carpet arrivals. The gala was officially beginning. Local news anchors were standing by the entrance interviewing guests as they arrived in their luxury vehicles. It was a who is who of Atlanta high society. Politicians, local celebrities, and prominent business owners were all stepping out onto the carpet, wearing tailored tuxedos and designer gowns. My parents arrived in a rented black limousine. Marcus stepped out first, wearing a crisp tuxedo that struggled to contain his waistline. He reached back and helped Beatrice out of the car. She was wearing a dramatic emerald green dress with a train that swept across the red carpet. She waved to the cameras with the practiced elegance of a woman who believed she was royalty. "Look at her," I murmured, my voice devoid of any warmth. She is soaking up every single second of this attention. She truly believes she is the victim. She has convinced herself that she is a righteous mother fighting for her family. She is going to have a very hard time maintaining that smile in federal prison. Malik noted, his eyes locked on the screen. The sheer volume of evidence we have against her is staggering. The fact that she is standing on that red carpet right now, soliciting more money from the church members she already robbed, is legally actionable on its own. Chloe and Brad made their entrance next. They paused in front of the cameras, striking perfect poses. Brad wrapped his arm around Chloe's waist, kissing her cheek for the photographers. They looked like the perfect, successful power couple. The reporters thrust microphones toward them, asking about their courageous legal battle against financial abuse. "We just want to protect our parents," Chloe said to a reporter, her voice quivering with fake emotion. "Family is everything to us. We will not let corporate greed destroy the people we love." I reached out and closed the laptop screen. The sudden silence in my office was heavy and electric. The time for observation was officially over. The trap had been set, the audience had been gathered, and the main characters were all standing exactly where I needed them to be. The pride comes before the fall, and my family had just climbed to the very top of the highest pedestal they could find. I unlocked the top drawer of my desk and pulled out a small silver flash drive. It contained every single piece of destructive truth my underwriting team and legal department had unearthed over the past week. It held the entire unedited reality of the Anderson family and the Hayes family. I tossed the flash drive across the glass desk. It slid smoothly and stopped right in front of Malik. "Print it." I commanded, my voice low and absolute. "Print every single page. Print the internal banking statements showing the illegal wire transfers from the church auxiliary fund. Print the routing numbers that prove Brad moved the stolen money into his personal checking accounts. Print the forensic accounting reports that verify his crypto startup has zero revenue and operates as a Ponzi scheme. Print the actual deed to the Buckhead mansion showing my sole ownership, and download every single audio file of those threatening voicemails my father left on our corporate machines." Malik picked up the flash drive, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "How many copies do you want?" he asked, standing up from his chair. "Just one master set," I replied, standing up as well. "I do not need to pass them out like flyers. I just need to put them in the right hands at the right time. We are not sending these through the mail. Malik, we are not filing them quietly in a courtroom where they can be sealed or hidden by expensive defense attorneys." Malik nodded, his eyes shining with anticipation. "We are crashing a party," he stated. "We are crashing a party," I confirmed. Malik left the office to access the secure printers in our legal department. I walked into the private executive suite attached to my office. I had prepared for this exact moment for days. Hanging on the closet door was the physical manifestation of my impending vengeance. I stripped off my practical gray business suit and began the transformation. For 32 years, I had dressed to blend in. I had worn muted colors and sensible shoes so I would not outshine my sister or draw the critical eye of my mother. I had lived in the shadows, allowing them to command the spotlight while I did the actual heavy lifting behind the scenes. But tonight, the shadows were gone. Tonight I was the main event. I slipped into a stunning floor-length crimson-red dress. It was an unapologetic, aggressive color. The fabric hugged my curves perfectly, a bold declaration of confidence. The neckline was sharp and modern. The dress did not ask for permission to be seen. It demanded absolute attention. It was the color of a warning sign, the color of fire and the color of blood. I paired it with sleek black stiletto heels that made me tower with authority. I pulled my hair back into a tight, elegant style that left my face completely exposed. I applied a deep red lipstick that perfectly matched the gown. I looked in the mirror and did not recognize the scapegoat who used to cry in her bedroom. I saw a ruthless chief executive officer who was about to orchestrate the most devastating corporate and social execution in the history of Atlanta. Malik returned to the executive suite 20 minutes later. He was holding a thick, heavy black leather briefcase. The brass buckles gleamed under the office lights. He set it down on the table and popped the latches. Inside, the documents were perfectly organized in crisp manila folders. The financial ruin of my entire family was neatly stacked and indexed. "It is all here," Malik said, his voice completely serious. "The wire fraud evidence, the embezzlement proof, the Ponzi scheme audits, and the original property deeds. There is enough evidence in this briefcase to put both Brad and your mother in federal custody for the next 10 years. Once you open this case in that ballroom, there is no going back, Nia. The damage will be permanent and highly public. The church will know, the investors will know, the media will know. I reached out and ran my fingers over the top edge of the folders. I thought about the decades of emotional abuse. I thought about my mother looking down her nose at me, calling me a failure. I thought about my father threatening to destroy the business I built with my own hands. I thought about Chloe crying on the internet, painting me as a monster while she paraded around in clothes bought with stolen charity money. They made their choices. Malik, I said quietly, closing the leather briefcase and snapping the brass locks shut. They chose to steal. They chose to lie. They chose to drag my name through the mud to protect their fragile egos. I am not destroying their lives. I am simply delivering the natural consequences of their own actions. I picked up the heavy briefcase by its thick leather handle. The weight of it felt incredibly satisfying in my grip. "Let us go," I said, walking past him toward the elevator. "It is time to give them exactly what they asked for." The ride through the glittering streets of downtown Atlanta was remarkably peaceful. I sat in the back of the black town car, watching the city lights blur past the tinted windows. The radio was off. There was no need for noise. My mind was executing a series of precise tactical calculations. I was reviewing the layout of the Four Seasons ballroom, the location of the main stage, the positioning of the audio-visual equipment. I was a general reviewing the battlefield map right before the invasion began. The town car pulled onto the grand circular driveway of the Four Seasons Hotel. The red carpet was still rolled out, leading up to the massive glass doors. The local reporters had packed up their heavy camera equipment, but a few independent photographers and social media bloggers were still lingering near the entrance, hoping to catch late-arriving celebrities. The valet rushed forward and opened the back door of the car. I stepped out into the humid night air. The crimson-red dress caught the bright lights of the hotel canopy instantly. The stilettos clicked sharply against the pavement. I stood tall, holding the thick leather briefcase in my right hand. The few photographers lingering near the velvet ropes turned their lenses toward me. They did not know who I was, but the sheer aggressive confidence of my entrance made them raise their cameras instinctively. The flashbulbs began to pop, casting brief, blinding bursts of white light across my path. I did not smile for them. I did not wave or seek their approval. I walked straight up the center of the red carpet with the absolute focus of an apex predator. The heavy glass doors of the luxury hotel slid open automatically, welcoming me into the opulent lobby. The sound of classical string music and the muffled hum of hundreds of wealthy guests drifted out from the grand ballroom down the hall. My family was inside that room drinking expensive champagne and accepting the sympathy and money of the people they had ruthlessly betrayed. They were celebrating their victory, dancing on the grave of my reputation. They felt entirely safe behind those closed doors, wrapped in their carefully constructed illusion of virtue and wealth. I adjusted my grip on the thick leather handle of the briefcase. I took a deep breath, letting the cool, air-conditioned air fill my lungs. The time for silence had officially run out. The scapegoat had arrived, and I was bringing the absolute crushing weight of reality right to their front door. The grand lobby of the Four Seasons Hotel was a masterclass in aggressive luxury. Towering marble pillars stretched up toward vaulted ceilings painted with intricate murals. The air smelled of expensive vanilla and fresh-cut highs. I walked across the polished stone floor, my crimson-red dress flowing behind me like a liquid threat. Ahead of me, the entrance to the grand ballroom was blocked by velvet ropes and two massive security guards wearing tailored black suits and earpieces. They were checking names off a digital tablet, looking for the elite guests invited to the charity gala that was currently being funded by stolen money. I approached the velvet rope without slowing down. The taller of the two guards stepped directly into my path, his hand raised in a universal gesture of denial. "Me. This is a private event," he stated, his voice deep and authoritative. "The Hayes Family Charity Gala is strictly invitation only. I need to see your ticket and your identification before you can proceed any further." I stopped just inches from his outstretched hand. I did not look at his tablet or his fake authoritative stance. I looked him directly in the eyes. "I do not have an invitation," I said calmly, "and I am not on that list." The guard sighed, a tired sound of a man who dealt with party crashers every single weekend. "Then you need to turn around and walk back out the front doors." "Ma," and he said, his tone growing slightly more aggressive, "if you do not leave the premises immediately, I will have you physically removed by the hotel management. I smiled. It was a slow, chilling smile. I reached into my small clutch purse and pulled out a solid black titanium card. It did not have my name on it. It only had a small silver crest engraved in the center. I held it up so the guard could see it clearly. "You are not going to have me removed," I explained, my voice dropping to a smooth, dangerous level, "because the private security firm you work for is contracted by the hotel management group, and the hotel management group leases this entire downtown property from a corporate holding entity. I am the chief executive officer of that holding entity. I own the commercial ground lease for this entire block. You are currently standing on my property. If you do not unhook that velvet rope right now, I will cancel your firm's vendor contract before my stilettos hit the ballroom carpet." The guard's eyes widened as he recognized the corporate crest on the titanium card. His tough guy facade dissolved in an instant. He swallowed hard, unhooked the velvet rope, and took a massive step backward, pressing his body against the marble pillar to give me as much space as possible. "My apologies, Miss Anderson," he stammered, keeping his eyes pinned to the floor. "Please proceed." I slipped the card back into my purse and walked past him. The heavy mahogany doors of the grand ballroom were just a few feet away. The muffled sound of a microphone echoing through speakers drifted out into the hallway. Chloe was already on stage giving her performance. Before I could reach the heavy wooden doors, a flash of emerald green stepped out from a nearby alcove. It was my mother. Beatrice had apparently stepped out of the ballroom to use the private restrooms, or perhaps just to admire her own reflection in the hallway mirrors. She froze when she saw me. The expensive champagne flute in her hand tilted dangerously, spilling a few drops of alcohol onto the plush carpet. Her shock lasted for exactly 2 seconds before it morphed into absolute venomous rage. The polite, socially acceptable mask she wore for her church friends vanished completely. She marched toward me, her heels stabbing the floorboards. "What the hell are you doing here?" Beatrice hissed, stopping just inches from my face. Her voice was a frantic, panicked whisper. She looked around wildly to make sure none of her wealthy guests had wandered out into the hallway to witness this interaction. "How did you get past security?" "You are not coming in there, Nia. I will not let you ruin this night for our family. We are raising money for victims. We are doing God's work." "God's work," I repeated, looking down at her emerald green designer gown. "You are wearing a dress that costs more than a car, and you bought it with money you stole from a domestic violence shelter. You are not doing God's work, Mom. You are throwing a desperate, fraudulent party to pay your high-prick defense attorneys because you know your son-in-law is a broke con artist." Beatrix's face flushed an ugly shade of dark purple. "You listen to me, you ungrateful little brat," she snarled, pointing her finger at my chest. "You are going to turn around and walk right back out those glass doors. If you take one more step toward that ballroom, I will scream for security. I will tell them you are stalking us. I will have you dragged out of this hotel in handcuffs and thrown in a police cruiser. I will completely destroy whatever is left of your miserable little life." She was so completely consumed by her own narcissistic delusions that she actually believed she still had power over me. She actually thought her empty threats meant something. I did not argue with her. I did not raise my voice. I simply reached into my thick leather briefcase and pulled out a heavy cream-colored envelope. It bore the official raised seal of the Fulton County Superior Court. I pressed the envelope flat against her chest. Beatrice reflexively grabbed it, her eyes darting from my face down to the thick paper. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice trembling slightly as the official county seal caught the light of the hallway chandeliers. "That is a 2-4-hour emergency eviction notice." I stated, my voice perfectly calm and devoid of any emotion. "The judge signed it at 4 this afternoon. You and Marcus have exactly 24 hours to pack whatever items you can carry and vacate the Buckhead mansion. If you are still on my property by tomorrow evening, the county sheriff will physically remove you and change the locks. You are officially homeless, Mom." Beatrix stopped breathing. Her mouth fell open, but no sound came out. Her hands shook so violently that the champagne flute slipped from her fingers and shattered against the floor, sending shards of expensive crystals scattering across the carpet. The reality of her total financial ruin was finally crashing down upon her. The mansion was gone. The illusion was over. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with raw, unfiltered terror. "You cannot do this," she gasped, clutching the envelope to her chest as if it were a physical wound. "You cannot put your own mother on the street. I will call Pastor Jenkins. I will tell the church. I will tell everyone what you are doing to us. I leaned in slightly, bringing my face closer to hers. I want you to look over your left shoulder. Mom, I whispered. Look toward the lobby bar by the grand piano. Do you see the two men sitting at the corner table drinking sparkling water and wearing cheap gray suits? Beatrice slowly turned her head. She spotted the two men immediately. They were not dressed in tuxedos like the rest of the gala guests. They were holding small notebooks and watching the ballroom entrance with sharp, calculating eyes. Those men are not here for the open bar, I explained softly. They are financial fraud detectives from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. My lawyers handed them the complete banking records of the Church Auxiliary Fund this morning. They know about the wire transfers. They know about the fake consulting fees. They are currently waiting for the gala to end so they can ask you a few questions about your accounting practices. Beatrice turned completely to stone. Her entire body went rigid. The color vanished from her face, leaving her looking like a hollow, empty shell of a human being. She could not speak. She could not move. The threat of public humiliation, the threat of losing her house, and the absolute certainty of federal prison had perfectly collided to shatter her mind. If you make a single sound right now, I continued my voice, slicing through her panic like a scalpel. If you scream or cry or try to stop me from walking through those doors, I will signal those detectives to walk over here and place you in handcuffs right in front of your wealthy friends. I will let them drag you through the lobby in your emerald green gown while the local news cameras film your exit. Do you understand me? Beatrice did not nod. She did not say a word. She was entirely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of her own destruction. She simply stood there frozen in place, clutching her eviction notice while standing in a puddle of spilled champagne. I stepped around her frozen body like she was nothing more than a piece of unwanted furniture. I reached out and placed my hands on the brass handles of the grand mahogany doors. I pushed the doors open. They swung inward silently, revealing the breathtaking scale of their absolute delusion. The grand ballroom of the Four Seasons was decorated to resemble a royal palace. Tens of thousands of white orchids cascaded from the ceilings. Massive crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over 30 round tables covered in pristine white silk. Hundreds of Atlanta's elite citizens were sitting in the audience wearing their finest jewelry and sipping imported wine. They had paid thousands of dollars a plate to sit in this room, believing they were supporting a noble cause against financial abuse. All of their attention was focused entirely on the brightly lit stage at the front of the massive room. A giant digital banner was projected on the wall behind the podium reading, "Surviving the Greed, a family's fight for justice." Standing at the clear acrylic podium, bathed in a bright white spotlight, was my sister, Chloe. She looked like the ultimate tragic heroine. She was wearing a simple but incredibly expensive white designer dress. Her hair was pulled back elegantly, and she was holding a microphone with both hands. She was in the middle of delivering a meticulously rehearsed, heavily emotional speech. "It is so hard," she sobbed into the microphone, her voice echoing through the massive speakers. Chloe paused to dab at her dry eyes with a white lace handkerchief. "It is so incredibly hard to stand here tonight and admit that the person who is trying to destroy us shares our blood. My sister Nia has lost her way. She has let corporate greed poison her soul. She has used her money and her power to try and render my elderly parents homeless out of pure spite and jealousy," the audience murmured in collective sympathy. Several wealthy women in the front row shook their heads in disgust at the thought of such a cruel, ungrateful daughter. "But we will not be broken." Chloe continued, her voice rising in a fake crescendo of bravery. "My husband and Brad and I are fighting back. We are using every resource we have to protect our parents from this financial abuse. Your generous donations tonight will go directly to our legal defense fund, ensuring that my sister cannot use her dirty real estate money to crush the people who gave her life. Family is sacred, and we will never stop fighting for ours." The crowd erupted into rapturous applause. People actually stood up from their chairs, clapping loudly for the brave, beautiful influencer who was supposedly shielding her poor elderly parents from a corporate monster. Brad was sitting at the VIP table right next to the stage, clapping the loudest, nodding his head in solemn agreement with his wife's fraudulent narrative. I stood at the back of the room holding my heavy leather briefcase, watching the entire disgusting performance. They were basking in the applause, soaking up the adoration and the stolen charity money. They truly believed they had won. They truly believed that their carefully constructed wall of lies was impenetrable. The applause began to die down as Chloe prepared to deliver her closing remarks. The room settled back into a hushed, respectful silence. That is when I took my first step. The sharp, confident click of my black stiletto heel against the polished hardwood of the center aisle echoed through the silent ballroom. I did not walk slowly, and I did not rush. I moved with the absolute certainty of a reckoning that could no longer be delayed. People sitting at the back tables turned around to see who was arriving late. Their eyes widened as they took in the sight of a woman in a blood-red dress marching straight up the center aisle. I was not wearing a polite, neutral color. I was a blazing inferno walking through a sea of black tuxedos and pastel gowns. The whispering started immediately. It spread through the ballroom like a wave rippling from the back to the front, as more and more guests turned their heads to watch my approach. Brad was the first person at the front to notice the shift in the crowd's attention. He turned in his chair, looking back down the center aisle. The smug, arrogant smile on his face vanished so quickly it looked like he had been struck by lightning. He gripped the edge of his table, his knuckles turning white. He recognized me instantly, and he knew exactly what the thick black leather briefcase in my hand meant. Chloe was still looking down at her speech notes, unaware of the approaching storm. "Thank you all so much for your support," she said into the microphone, preparing to wrap up her dramatic performance. "Together, we can stop this abuse. Together, we can." Chloe finally looked up from her notes. Her eyes scanned the crowd, expecting to see adoring faces looking back at her. Instead, she saw hundreds of people turning in their chairs, looking away from the stage, and staring down the center aisle. She followed their gaze, and her eyes locked directly onto mine. The color drained from Chloe's face so rapidly she looked like a ghost. Her mouth fell open, but the words completely died in her throat. She stood frozen at the podium, the microphone trembling in her hands, gripping the acrylic stand to keep her knees from buckling. The golden child was finally face to face with the scapegoat she had spent her entire life trying to destroy. I did not stop walking. I kept my eyes locked on hers, my expression completely devoid of mercy. I reached the front row, passing the wealthy socialites and the church elders who were now staring at me in absolute stunned silence. I walked past Brad's table, ignoring the terrified gasps coming from his direction. I reached the base of the stage. I did not wait for an invitation. I placed my hand on the polished wooden railing and began to climb the stairs. The heavy leather briefcase swung at my side, carrying the total financial and social ruin of the entire Anderson family. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. I stepped onto the stage, the crimson-red fabric of my dress pooling around my ankles, and I walked straight toward the podium. I stepped up to the clear acrylic podium. Chloe was completely immobilized by her own terror. Her hands were still gripped around the neck of the microphone, but her fingers were trembling so violently they were rattling the heavy plastic stand. She looked at me with wide, terrified eyes, begging me silently to turn around and walk away to spare her from the reality she knew was coming. I did not smile. I did not offer her a single ounce of sibling comfort or mercy. I reached out and gently but firmly wrapped my fingers around the microphone. I peeled her shaking hands off the cold metal one by one. She surrendered it without a fight, stepping back and shrinking into the shadows of the bright stage lights, her fake tears drying instantly on her pale face. I adjusted the microphone stand so it was perfectly aligned with my posture. I looked out at the sea of wealthy Atlanta elites, church elders, and local politicians who had just spent the last hour throwing their money at a fabricated tragedy. "Good evening, everyone," I said. My voice did not yell. It did not shake. It echoed through the massive ballroom with a deadly, absolute calm that demanded complete submission from every single person in the room. "My name is Nia Anderson. I am the abusive, greedy sister you are all just weeping over. I am the ruthless corporate monster who supposedly stole her elderly parents' home and forced them onto the street." I stood perfectly still, letting the weight of my introduction settle over the crowd. The silence was absolute. You could hear the soft humming of the crystal chandeliers hanging above us. "I know you are all very generous people." I continued, my voice smooth and calculated, wrapping around the silent ballroom like a velvet trap. "You came here tonight to write thick checks to protect a family from financial ruin. You opened your wallets because you believed you were fighting against financial abuse. But before you hand over any more of your hard-earned money to my sister and her husband, I think it is only fair that you know exactly what you are paying for." I reached into my small clutch purse and pulled out a universal syncing cable. I plugged one end directly into my smartphone and inserted the other end into the primary audio-visual port built into the side of the modern hotel podium. The massive digital banner behind me that read "Surviving the Greed" flickered for a fraction of a second. Then, it vanished entirely. In its place, the towering projector screens illuminated with the mirrored display of my smartphone. The entire ballroom gasped collectively as the screens lit up the dark room with stark, blinding white light. I tapped an audio file icon on my screen. Let us start with the tragic elder abuse lawsuit my parents filed against me yesterday morning, I announced to the captivated audience. According to their sworn legal testimony, I am a predator who manipulated them into signing away their multi-million-dollar estate. But let us hear what they actually said when they thought no one was listening to them. I pressed play on the audio file. The crisp, clear sound of my father's voice boomed through the state-of-the-art surround sound speakers of the Four Seasons ballroom. What the guests did not know was that as the legal owner and landlord of the Buckhead Mansion, I had installed high-end smart home security cameras in the common areas years ago to protect my investment. The microphones on those cameras were incredibly sensitive. If she does not clear Brad's debt, we will just sue her for elder abuse. Marcus's recorded voice snarled, dripping with malicious intent. We will tell the judge she tricked us into signing the house away. She has too much to lose with her corporate clients. She will settle out of court and pay us off just to keep it out of the news. Then, my mother's voice chimed in, completely devoid of her sweet, devoted church persona. We have to do it. Marcus Beatrix's voice echoed through the speakers, harsh and desperate. Brad is completely broke. If we do not squeeze the money out of Nia right now, the church is going to find out about the missing auxiliary funds and I will go to federal prison. Just sign the lawsuit and let the lawyers scare her into paying us whatever we want. The audio clip ended. I paused the playback and looked back out at the audience. The reaction was instantaneous and catastrophic. Pastor Jenkins, who was sitting in the front row, stood up from his chair, his face a mask of absolute horror and profound religious betrayal. The wealthy socialites who had just been dabbing their eyes with expensive lace handkerchiefs were now staring at the stage with their mouths hanging open in pure shock. They realized they had been entirely conned by the very people hosting the gala. Angry murmurs began to ripple through the sea of tables, but a fake lawsuit is just the appetizer for this evening. I continued, my voice cutting sharply through the rising murmurs of the outraged crowd. Let us look at the main course. Let us look at why my parents were so incredibly desperate to extort me for cash in the first place. I swiped my phone screen, opening a highly detailed forensic accounting report. My legal team had finalized that afternoon. The massive screens behind me shifted to display a complex web of bank statements and wire transfers, with key routing numbers highlighted in bright glowing red. The official logo of the Atlanta Grace Community Church was clearly visible at the top of the scanned documents. As my sister mentioned earlier in her beautiful speech, family is everything, I said, looking directly at Chloe, who was currently wrapping her arms around her chest, shivering in her expensive white gown, as if the room had suddenly dropped to freezing temperatures. And my mother Beatrice believed in protecting her family so much that she used her secure administrative access as the treasurer of the church to wire over $150,000 of your charity funds directly out of the church accounts. The crowd erupted into loud, disgusted gasps. Several church elders seated near the front row stood up, pointing in shock at the massive screens. I zoomed in on the banking documents, magnifying the transaction histories for everyone to read clearly. As you can see here, ladies and gentlemen, the funds designated for your domestic violence shelters and your community food banks were routed through a dummy shell company. From there, they were deposited directly into the personal checking account of my brother-in-law, Bradley Hayes. I gestured gracefully toward Brad, who was sitting at his VIP table near the front of the stage. Brad tried to push his chair back and stand up, but the sheer weight of the glaring, furious eyes completely surrounding his table kept him paralyzed in his seat. His face was slick with terrified sweat, and he was hyperventilating his hands, gripping the edge of the tablecloth so hard his knuckles were bone white. Chloe finally found her voice. She took a hesitant, trembling step forward, her face pale and streaked with ruined mascara. Nia, stop it, she pleaded, her voice cracking as she reached a shaking hand toward me. Brad used that money for his crypto startup. He is a tech visionary. He was going to pay it all back to the church once his venture capital came through. You do not understand business. You are twisting this to make him look bad. I turned to look at my golden child sister with a profound, sickening pity. She was so completely blinded by her desperation to maintain her perfect, affluent lifestyle that she was actively defending a man who had stolen from battered women. "Chloe, I understand business perfectly well," I said, speaking softly into the microphone, but projecting loud enough for the entire furious ballroom to hear every single syllable. "What you do not understand is your own husband." I swiped to the next page of the forensic financial report. The projector screen shifted to display a long series of high-value credit card transactions and a signed commercial residential lease agreement. The undeniable paper trail of a man who had zero moral compass. "Brad's crypto company has absolutely zero proprietary technology and zero revenue," I explained, using a digital pointer on my phone to highlight the massive charges on the screen behind me. "What he does have, however, is a highly expensive taste for the finer things in life. The stolen church money did not go toward computer servers or coding engineers. Chloe, it went directly to the luxury boutiques at Lenox Square." I tapped the screen, advancing the slides. "Here is a charge for the $12,000 Chanel bag you are currently carrying. Here is the $50,000 wire transfer for the down payment on your brand new Tesla. Here are the receipts for the 5-star vacations you have been bragging about on Instagram all year. You have been wearing stolen charity money like a badge of honor." Chloe shook her head violently side to side in aggressive denial. "No," she stammered, tears flooding her eyes anew. But this time they were real. "No, he bought those things for me because he loves me. He is a successful provider. He would not steal. He loves me." I tapped the screen one final time. The display zoomed in on a heavily redacted rental agreement for a luxury high-rise apartment in the center of Midtown Atlanta. The monthly rent was listed at an astronomical $6,000 a month. The lease was explicitly signed by Bradley Hayes. I looked deeply into Chloe's terrified, heartbroken eyes. "He loves you so much, Chloe, that he used the stolen church money to sign a 1-2-month lease on a luxury penthouse in Midtown," I stated, my voice ringing with absolute chilling finality. "But you do not have a key to that apartment, do you? Because Brad does not use that expensive penthouse for his crypto business meetings. He uses it to house his 2-4-year-old secret mistress." The entire ballroom let out a collective shocked breath. "Her name is written right there on the secondary tenant line." I continued, ignoring the chaos erupting in the audience. "He has been paying her rent, buying her expensive jewelry, and funding her lavish lifestyle with the exact same stolen charity money he used to buy your luxury car. While you were sitting on the internet crying about how much you loved your perfect, faithful husband, he was busy spending stolen church donations on another woman." Chloe turned slowly like a broken mechanical doll to look at Brad in the front row. She stared down at the man she had worshipped, the man our parents had elevated above me for years. Brad did not shake his head. He did not shout out a denial. He did not even try to formulate a lie. He simply stared down at his expensive leather shoes. His face flushed a dark, guilty, humiliated red. The absolute truth was printed in massive letters on a 30-foot screen behind me, and there was absolutely no way to gaslight his way out of it. The illusion of the perfect interracial marriage, the perfect brilliant tech bro husband, the perfect wealthy lifestyle. It all shattered simultaneously in front of hundreds of the most prominent people in the city of Atlanta. The absolute devastation hit Chloe with the force of a freight train. Chloe let out a guttural, agonizing wail that tore through the microphone and echoed violently across the silent room. It was the sound of a woman whose entire identity had just been incinerated in a matter of seconds. Her legs completely gave out beneath her. The golden child, the pride of the Anderson family, dropped hard to her knees right there on the polished wooden stage. Her expensive white designer dress pulled around her as she collapsed into a sobbing, shaking, broken heap of absolute humiliation and despair. She buried her face in her hands, weeping so loudly and so pathetically that several people in the front row actually had to look away. She had climbed to the absolute highest social pedestal she could find to tear me down, and I had just kicked the single supporting pillar out from underneath her. The grand charity gala had officially transformed into a public execution, and the ballroom immediately descended into absolute pandemonium. Wealthy socialites were shouting over each other, pointing at the massive projection screens while church elders shook their heads in absolute disgust. The carefully curated illusion of the perfect affluent family was burning to the ground right in front of the most powerful people in Atlanta. Down in the front row, Brad finally snapped out of his paralyzed state of terror. The sheer weight of the public humiliation was too much for his fragile, narcissistic ego to process. He could not simply sit there and let a black woman he had deemed beneath him destroy his entire life in front of his wealthy peers. The survival instinct of a cornered con artist took over his brain, completely shutting down any remaining shred of logic or common sense. He pushed his heavy dining chair back so violently that it tipped over and crashed onto the marble floor. He stomped toward the stage, his face twisted into an ugly mask of desperate fury. He marched up the wooden stairs, his expensive leather shoes stomping heavily against the floorboards. He completely ignored his wife, who was still sobbing uncontrollably in a heap of white designer fabric. He walked straight up to the clear acrylic podium and stood just inches away from me. His face was slick with sweat, and his breathing was heavy and erratic. The smell of expensive cologne mixed with the sour stench of pure panic radiated off his body. He reached out and tried to snatch the microphone away from my hands, but I locked my fingers around the metal stand with an iron grip, refusing to yield even an inch of my space. I stared right back into his furious, bloodshot eyes, completely unbothered by his attempted physical intimidation. "You are a liar!" Brad screamed into the microphone, his voice echoing violently over the chaotic noise of the crowded ballroom. "You are a pathetic, bitter, jealous liar trying to ruin my life because you have absolutely nothing of your own. My company is completely legitimate. My company is a unicorn startup destined to change the financial sector. We are untouchable." He turned his head and desperately addressed the sea of outraged guests, trying to deploy his smooth tech bro sales pitch one last time. "Listen to me, everyone," Brad yelled, his voice cracking slightly with desperation. "Do not listen to this bitter, vindictive woman. She is just jealous of my success in my marriage. My technology is revolutionary. My business model is flawless. My series of funding round was entirely capitalized by one of the largest institutional investors on the planet. We are backed by Vanguard Investments. Vanguard does not fund Ponzi schemes. Vanguard does rigorous due diligence. We have millions of dollars in secured institutional capital backing us right now. She is just projecting fake documents on a screen to confuse you all." The ballroom grew slightly quieter as the guests listened to his frantic defense. A few people looked at me, waiting to see how I would counter the invocation of a massive, globally recognized investment firm. They wanted to see if the scapegoat would finally falter under the pressure of his aggressive confidence. I did not step back. I did not flinch. I simply looked at the sweating, desperate man standing next to me, and I laughed. It was a genuine melodic laugh that cut right through his frantic shouting and echoed through the silent ballroom. It was the calm, chilling laugh of a woman who had spent months meticulously orchestrating a flawless checkmate and was finally watching the final piece drop onto the board. "Vanguard Investments?" I asked, my voice dripping with absolute condescension. "Is that who you tell your country club friends is backing your garbage startup, Brad? Is that the impressive lie you tell your mistresses when you use stolen church donations to sign the lease on their luxury midtown apartments?" I watched his eyes dart back and forth. He was trying desperately to maintain his arrogant posture, but the foundation of his confidence was cracking right down the middle. "Yes, Vanguard." He spat back, his jaw clenched tight. "They funded our entire series, a capital raise. You cannot touch us, Nia. My lawyers will destroy you for this. You clearly never bothered to read the fine print on your own series. A funding contracts, Brad," I said softly, leaning closer into the microphone so the entire room could hear the absolute finality of his execution. "Vanguard is a massive investment firm, yes, but Vanguard uses thousands of independent brokerages and private equity networks to distribute capital to high-risk tech startups. Your funding did not come directly from their primary institutional treasury. I came through a specialized private equity shell company that operates discreetly under their vast corporate umbrella." Brad stopped breathing. The aggressive defensive stance melted away entirely as a new terrifying confusion took over his features. "What are you talking about?" he stammered, his voice dropping to a panicked whisper. I pulled my phone from the podium and tapped the screen once more. The massive projector behind us shifted from the luxury apartment lease to a heavily redacted commercial funding contract. The document was filled with dense legal jargon, but the name of the capitalized entity providing the funds was highlighted in glowing neon red right at the top of the page. "What is the exact name of the shell company that capitalized your entire tech startup, Brad?" I asked, my voice cold and commanding, leaving absolutely no room for escape. Read it out loud for the audience. Let everyone hear who really owns your fake unicorn company. Brad turned his head slowly, looking up at the massive projection screen. His eyes scanned the highlighted text, and his face went completely ashen. His voice was barely a strangled whisper when he read the letters into the microphone. N.A. Holdings. Exactly, I said, my voice ringing with total authority. N.A. Holdings. Do you know what those letters stand for, Brad? They do not stand for National Assets or North American Investments. N.A. stands for Nia Anderson. The entire ballroom let out another massive collective gasp. Pastor Jenkins sank completely back into his chair, putting his head in his hands. Chloe, who had been quietly sobbing on the floor of the stage, suddenly went completely rigid, staring up at me with wide, unblinking eyes as the absolute magnitude of the trap finally dawned on her. I am in a holdings, Brad, I stated, locking my eyes onto his terrified face. I did not just audit your pony when you arrogantly applied for a commercial expansion loan from Oasis Trust. I have been monitoring your fraudulent operations for over a year when you desperately needed an injection of cash to keep your Ponzi scheme afloat and hide the money you embezzled from my mother's church. I authorized my private equity firm to step in and buy out your initial investors. I bought your debt, Brad. I own your series of funding. I am your primary secured creditor. Brad literally stumbled backward, as if he had been physically struck in the chest by a sledgehammer. He bumped hard into the clear acrylic podium, his expensive suit clinging to his sweating frame. You cannot do that, he gasped, his chest heaving as he struggled to pull air into his lungs. That is illegal. You cannot just buy a company secretly to destroy it. You set me up. I did not buy it to destroy it, Brad. I corrected him smoothly, my tone completely conversational and devoid of pity. You destroyed it all by yourself when you decided to run a fraudulent business model and steal charity funds to buy my sister designer bags and fund your infidelity. I simply bought the legal right to hold you accountable for your own choices. When a company takes on massive venture capital debt, they have to sign a standard commercial collateral agreement. You were so eager to get your hands on that cash that you signed the paperwork without having a real lawyer review the terms. You put up every single asset you own as collateral for that funding. Your company, your intellectual property, your bank accounts, your luxury car, and your personal assets. You signed it all over to N.A. Holdings. You signed your entire life over to me. I slowly raised my left arm, pushing back the sleeve of my crimson-red dress, and looked down at my expensive silver wristwatch. The time was exactly 5:15 inches the evening. The traditional business day had officially concluded, and as the primary secured debt holder of your company, I have the legal right to call in that debt immediately. If I discover fraudulent financial activity within the organization, I announced, looking back up at his utterly terrified face. And as of 5 this evening, the exact moment business hours officially concluded, I executed my legal right to call in the entirety of your corporate debt. I filed the paperwork in federal court for the immediate and total liquidation of your startup. Your company is dead, Brad. Your assets are legally seized. Your bank accounts are permanently frozen. You have absolutely nothing left. Right on cue, a sound pierced through the heavy, shocked silence of the grand ballroom. It was faint at first, but it grew louder and more piercing with every passing second. It was the unmistakable high-pitched wail of police sirens echoing rapidly through the busy downtown Atlanta streets outside. The flashing red and blue lights began to reflect against the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of the Four Seasons Hotel, casting erratic, frantic shadows across the elegant, silk-covered walls of the ballroom. Brad spun around, looking at the tall windows in pure animalistic panic. He looked exactly like a trapped rat that had just realized the cage door was firmly locked. He looked back at me, his eyes pleading, begging for a mercy he absolutely did not deserve and a mercy I had zero intention of granting. "Nia, please," he whispered, his voice breaking into a pathetic whimper. "Please do not do this to me. I will pay it all back. I can fix it. I will give you everything. Please do not let them take me. You cannot fix federal wire fraud." "Brad," I said quietly, leaning away from the microphone so only he could hear my final judgment. "You played a stupid game and you just lost everything." The heavy mahogany doors at the back of the grand ballroom swung open violently, hitting the walls with a loud crash. The two men in the cheap gray suits who had been sitting patiently at the lobby bar marched into the room. They were no longer trying to blend in with the luxury environment. They were flanked by 4 heavily armed, uniformed Atlanta police officers. The wealthy crowd parted instantly, scrambling out of the way to create a wide, clear path down the center aisle. The financial crimes detectives walked straight down the aisle, their eyes locked onto the stage with absolute tactical focus. They climbed the wooden stairs, their heavy boots thudding loudly against the floorboards, destroying whatever remained of the elegant gala atmosphere. Bradley Hayes, one of the detectives, said, his voice deep and authoritative, holding up a gold federal badge that glinted under the bright stage lights. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The detective did not wait for Brad to respond. He grabbed Brad's arms, spinning him around roughly and pulling his hands tightly behind his back. The sharp metallic click of the steel handcuffs locking firmly around his wrists echoed loudly through the microphone, broadcasting his total downfall to the entire silent room. Chloe screamed a raw, agonizing sound of pure despair as she watched her perfect white knight husband being paraded off the stage in shackles. The golden child was left weeping on the floor, surrounded by the ashes of her fraudulent empire, while I stood tall at the podium, completely untouched and absolutely victorious. 1 week later, the dust had finally settled over the city of Atlanta. The grand charity gala that was supposed to destroy my reputation had instead become the highly publicized graveyard of my family and their fraudulent empire. The local news cycles had run the story of the embezzled church funds and the fake crypto startup into the ground. Every high society connection my parents had ever made completely severed ties with them overnight. The illusion was dead, and the harsh reality of their consequences had officially arrived. The heavy Georgia humidity hung in the morning air as I stood on the perfectly manicured lawn of the Buckhead mansion. I was not wearing a crimson-red dress today. I wore a simple sharp gray business suit. Standing directly to my right was a uniformed Fulton County Court bailiff holding a thick clipboard. The 30-day grace period I had originally offered, my parents had been legally revoked the exact moment they attempted to sue me for elder abuse. The emergency eviction order was now absolute and immediate. The massive oak front doors of the estate swung open heavily. My father, Marcus, stepped out first. He was dragging 2 large suitcases behind him, the plastic wheels scraping loudly against the stone porch. His broad shoulders were slumped, and the arrogant strut he had practiced for decades was completely gone. He looked like a broken, exhausted old man who had finally run out of lies to tell the world. Behind him came my mother, Beatrice. She was not wearing sequins or pearls or designer heels. She wore plain gray sweatpants and a faded shirt, carrying a small cardboard box filled with whatever meager personal belongings the federal investigators had allowed her to keep. The authorities had already seized her bank accounts and frozen her retirement assets pending the upcoming embezzlement trial. Beatrice stopped at the bottom of the stone steps. She looked at me standing on the lawn with the bailiff. Her eyes were swollen and dark red from days of constant crying. The reality of her new homeless, destitute life was staring her right in the face. She dropped her cardboard box onto the driveway and stumbled toward me. "Nia, please," she sobbed, her voice cracking with raw, pathetic desperation. "Please do not do this to us. Where are we supposed to go? We have no money left. The church has completely abandoned us, and the pastor will not even look at me. My friends will not answer my phone calls. We have nothing. Please, Nia, I am your mother." I looked at her without a single ounce of pity. The well of my empathy had dried up entirely years ago. "You are the woman who gave birth to me," I said, my voice as cold and flat as the marble steps she had just walked down. But a real mother does not call her child a failure in front of a dining room full of people. A real mother does not steal money from battered women to buy her favorite daughter a designer bag. A real mother does not try to frame her own flesh and blood for elder abuse just to save her own skin. You are not my mother, Beatrice. You are just a tenant who failed to pay her rent. Marcus did not say a word to me. He did not apologize or beg or threaten me with his imaginary connections. He simply loaded the heavy suitcases into the trunk of a cheap rusted sedan he had managed to rent for the day. He opened the passenger door for Beatrice. She stood there weeping heavily, waiting for me to break to show mercy to rescue her one last time, the way I always used to do. I simply turned my back to her and nodded to the bailiff to proceed with changing the locks on the front doors. The sound of the rented sedan driving away down the long gravel driveway was the sound of a toxic tumor finally being excised from my life. Across town, my sister Chloe was facing her own brutal reality. The golden child was officially tarnished beyond repair. Brad was sitting in a federal holding facility, having been denied bail due to his status as an extreme flight risk. The crypto startup was dissolved, and the luxury midtown apartment he had rented for his 4-year-old mistress was cleared out and repossessed. Chloe had quietly filed for divorce from her convicted felon husband, but the social damage was